Hello and welcome back to Puck on the Parkway. Daniel Rebane and James Burley here to break down everything latest in the New Jersey Devils world. We've got some preseason hockey to talk about. We did a little bit of a preseason preview, if you will, last week, and we've got some news to break. At the top of it is Dawson Mercer signs for the Devils. Some injuries that we suspected are not as serious as we thought, perhaps, and the play's not been so great thus far, but it is preseason. Last year they went 7-0, and look at what the season turned out. They start 0-3, and maybe it'll have the opposite effect in 2024-25. But first, some introductions. Dan, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing fine. 3 games so far for Devils hockey, and the results haven't been the best, but I'm just glad hockey's back. We're enjoying what's going on around the league so far. And we only got one game before this team goes over to Prague, Czech Republic, and the regular season is going to start from there. So I'm just happy we're back, and let's get it started.
Yeah, a bit of a quick turnaround, honestly, in terms of preseason to regular season, at least for the main guys who are going to be playing the bulk of the season in New Jersey. That's tonight against the Islanders being their final game before the trip. And then, of course, some of the minor leaguers are going to have their chance to play in those final three preseason games stateside here in North America. But yeah, we're going to send Devils across the across the pond soon to Czech Republic for their start of the season ahead of their back-to-back to open up the year against the Buffalo Sabres. I guess it's going to be an interesting way to start the season. I know people have been complaining about the travel and how that might affect your start to the year, but they do get 5 days rest afterward before their first game, North America against the Maple Leafs, which will be at the Prudential Center. So there's a lot to be excited about. I think it's going to be a great spectacle. I think it's going to be a learning experience, and teams have done well after making those trips early in the season. It's been valuable in a lot of ways. So that's a lot to be excited about, but let's keep it current before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about what happened last week. We spoke about this last weekend, actually, and how we were excited that it finally got done, although maybe they could have financially found a bit more of a leeway there with Dawson Mercer. But 4 million AAV, 3 years, 12 million. He's back, the restricted free agent, young forward, signs for the Devils, and I think this is a home run. I think the price, while it could have been a bit lower, is fair, and it's backloaded. So he earns 3 million this year and 4.75 and 4.25 each of the next 2 years, which I think is a good strategy from Fitzgerald. And yeah, that pretty much fills out the forward core for this group going into the season. Not as much firepower as it had last year, as there's no Tyler Toffoli, but having Dawson Mercer back and locked down for 3 more seasons, I think is a big win for Tom Fitzgerald and the Devils, Dan.
Yeah, I think, when you see that 4 million AAV, I think you're like, that's a bit fair. I think, some fans would have hoped that he'd take just a bit of a hometown discount, maybe like, 250K, 500K, because that money could go a long way in the next couple of years, especially with all the extensions that the Devils are going to have to come up with. But, at the end of the day, 4 million is not going to, bust the cap for the Devils. And I think it's fair, like you said. So, just glad to get him back. He only missed 1 day of training camp, which is fine. And he already got into a game last game. Again, I forget who we played now. I'm losing my mind. But, he's already in the game. He'll get a second game before he goes over to Prague. So, glad he's back. And now, as you said, not as much firepower as we had last year, but I think this team is more balanced heading into this season. So, glad that Dawson's back.
Yeah, I think we talked about at least last weekend and at the end of last season, really, last season meaning of this podcast, that the Devils didn't necessarily bring in a big scoring winger that they didn't have last year, but they're going to have a healthy Timo Meier to start the season. They're hopefully going to have a fully healthy Jack Hughes to start the season, and they bring in guys like Stefan Nason, Tomas Tatar, Paul Cotter. 2 of those guys we already know pretty well from their time in New Jersey prior. I think you're absolutely right to say that it's a more balanced look. And Dawson Mercer is one of those guys that, can play good minutes in the bottom 6 and good minutes in the top 6. So I love that he's there. He's going to be important on the back end and on the front end. I think he's going to be a consistent 20, 25 goal scorer for years to come for this team. A great secondary scorer And guys like that are invaluable when it comes to playoff hockey. I think Dawson Mercer is a terrific hockey player. I love that he's a New Jersey Devil, and I love that he wants to be a New Jersey Devil. So this is a great move. Finally, they got it done. Had me worried there for a minute, but
Took a bit.
never in doubt from Tom Fitzgerald. So that's a great start really to this show. And he did get a few minutes to play in that Washington Capitals game, I believe.
Washington, yeah.
They lost 5-3. Perhaps the best of their three preseason games thus far. The 3-0 loss to Montreal, not great. I think Markstrom looked good in his first two periods as a Devil against the Islanders in that first game, had 19 saves. But yeah, I think it's preseason, and if we took too much away from it, I think we'd be foolish, and I think we did a little bit of that last year. So let's hopefully not do that. Let's talk about some player news, though. Last week we got a bit scared that we were going to have both of our best young defensemen not available for the start of the season in Seaman Nemec and Luke Hughes. And while Luke Hughes we know will be out for 4 to 8 weeks, I mean, assuming it's going to be closer to the 8 mark than the 4 mark, based on history with injuries such as that to the shoulder area. Nemec has been fully cleared. He's playing hockey. Love that. Brett Pesce was back on the ice, although his status is still a bit unknown, at least for the future. And Erik Haula has been out sick for the first 3 games of preseason. So which of those 3 or 4 do you want to start with?
Let's talk about Nemec because, as you said, when we first saw his injury in Olympic qualifying with Slovakia, I think, we were all concerned. I think, sliding into the boards like that, another shoulder potential injury, it was scary for a lot of fans. But, glad to see that he's full to go at the start of training camp and he'll be in the lineup. I think the most encouraging sign is Pesce being on the ice today. He obviously won't play in the game, but him being able to get practices, and I think he's closer than I would have anticipated. I thought he might have missed the first couple of games of the season, but looks like he could be potentially back for that Toronto game.
Yeah, and that would be huge to have him fully ready to go for the start of the season, at least in North America. Only missing 2 games is not a problem. I mean, last week we were completely uncertain about what his status would be and thought maybe he joins Luke Hughes on, I don't want to say long-term injury, but a midterm injury. And to see him back on the ice is very encouraging. The Devils' newest defenseman, alongside Brendan Dillon, of course. That's the guy who you want to be durable all season long, right? He's the guy who's going to be on every penalty kill, more or less. He's going to be a guy that you need on the ice in tough moments. I think that was a great midseason pickup, and if they can have him available, healthy, ready to go, the blue line's only going to be improved from what it was last year. So with Erik Haula sick, I think that is a tricky one personally, because again, sickness is something that the Devils have had to deal with, strangely enough, I feel like every year there's always someone who gets sick with something and is out for a week, 2 weeks in the middle of the season. And I'm just kind of glad it's happening in the preseason for Haula, because he's another guy who I think durability-wise, you want him available for as many games as possible, can play 2 ways. Pretty similar in his impact on the team to Dawson Mercer, in my opinion. So I love Haula and can't wait to see him ready to go. If there's anything else on preseason, though, I mean, we're going to wrap up with it, at least with the most important guys playing tonight. Hasn't been a lot to love from the first 3 games, but I guess it's better that they haven't gone 7-0, because that can be a bit of a curse. So where do you want to start with preseason?
Well, we do have to mention one more person injured, and that's Santeri Hatakka.
Correct.
According to head coach Keefe, it's not day-to-day, so it's more serious than that. So that sucks for him, because he probably would have made this roster going over to Czechia. So that's tough to see, but another spot to be filled by another guy that might have been in Utica this year to start the season at least. And then just to touch on Haula, today he got his second practice in, and he is going to be in the game tonight against the Islanders. So that bodes well for him heading over to Czechia as well. But yeah, you bring up preseason. it's just to get all the kinks out, all the rust out. These are the first games that they're playing all season. Obviously, all the players are training in the summer, skating and everything. But this is the first time like a lot of these players are playing together. Brendan Dillon looking good.
Mhm.
All these other guys that we brought in like Cotter and Nason, they're coming into a new environment. So I think it's just all about chemistry at this point, knowing where each person's going to be. And I think this trip overseas to Europe is going to be big for this team, especially with all the new faces. No families, no wives, no kids to get involved. It's just the boys just getting to know each other, and we know how some of these trips lead to success throughout the season. So I'm glad they're going over there. Jet lag might be a thing, but hey man, they'll be over there for about 5 or 7 days before the game. So they'll enjoy their time over there, I think.
Yeah, I'm not buying the excuses about the travel and the jet lag. Like, yes, it'll be bad, but this will be the only time this season they do it. And every now and then, you got to remember these guys make a flight to Western Canada, Northwestern Canada, and Southwestern United States. Those are 5 6 hour flights.
Yeah,
I think they can handle it. And the time difference, yeah, might be a factor at the start. But like you mentioned, they'll be there for about a week, and then they have another 4 or 5 days when they come back to get reacclimated to being on the east coast of the U.S. So I think that they'll figure it out. They'll be fine in that regard. If I can recall, going back to 2017-18, which prior to 2 years ago was the first year the Devils made the playoffs in 6 seasons, the Taylor Hall year, as many people remember it as, under John Hines. That team went on a preseason trip to Army West Point for a week, did like a I don't want to say they did a boot camp because they didn't, but they did do like some of those outdoorsy activities that you would see at a weeks away at a military academy.
yeah,
And I mean, that team, it wasn't the most balanced in terms of who was doing the scoring. It was Taylor
yeah.
Hall, and then I believe Nico was the second highest point scorer in his rookie season there. So that was a fun year. And I'm glad that now we have, hey, look, these preseason trips, they could be valuable. I remember the Devils also did a big preseason trip to Switzerland.
Yep.
Not too long after that. Maybe that was the season they went to the playoffs as well, or I think maybe that was maybe the season following. Either way, these things, they're good for team camaraderie. They help establish an identity early, and I think it's a fun thing that these guys are going to remember for the rest of their lives. So I don't want to hear anything about starting 2 games in a different continent and the jet lag and everything. These guys are professionals. They've dealt with similar scenarios in their careers before, and I think that they can overcome that. As for Santeri Hitaka, I apologize for forgetting to mention him. He was a guy that I thought did really well, and we've said this before, in his limited time with the NHL club at the end of last season. Looked like he could be a reliable 7th D, really. But he's not a guy that I would want to bring up just to be on the 7th D. So while I think that he really could have made this team to go to Czechia and played in those first 2 games, I think, the injury could give him some time to establish his game. If when he gets healthy, hope it's not too serious. Establish his game back in Utica, get into good form, get into good team form, and then who knows, maybe break in long term at the NHL level, because he's a guy that I really think day in and day out can be a reliable defenseman. As for the preseason, the way it started, I mean, yeah, this guy's knocking the rust off, right? This is all about just getting those minutes, getting some ice time underneath your legs before the real season starts.
Yeah.
I think Brendan Dillon is a good one you mentioned, because I'm not sure if he's really had the chance to play with his long-term D partner yet, given Pesce's not been playing. Hughes, Namish. I mean, you're not sure who he's going to pair up with long term. The fact that he's looked good and has fit right in is a bonus. Like I mentioned, Markstrom hasn't looked spectacular, but he's looked like he's a goaltender who's good enough to make the saves when you expect him and to count on it. He's a guy who makes big saves. I mean, he proved that last year, finished 9th in goals saved above expected. So the fact that he's making 19 saves across 2 periods against the Islanders, I think maybe seeing a bit too much rubber there for my liking, but it's good to know that the Devils now have a goaltender that when it's a 2-on-1 the other way, you think might make the save.
Yeah.
It was a foregone conclusion last year that if the other team had a good chance, it was going in the back of the net. you need your goaltender to make big saves. And while I don't think Markstrom made any spectacular saves, I got the sense that he's comfortable enough in that net to pull up a big save in a big moment. And that having that on the back end is going to keep the Devils in games. So with the roster that they have, with the balance they have, if they can stay healthy and Markstrom's playing to his ability in net, there is no reason that on any given night the New Jersey Devils can't walk away with 2 points. And while the preseason, you might be saying, how is that reflected in an 0-3 start to the preseason? They doesn't have to be. They don't have to be crushing teams right now. They just have to be playing good, smart hockey. I think there's obviously room to grow, but once the whole team is there and ready, there's no reason, in my opinion, that this Devils team can't hit their ceiling. And I do think that they'll give themselves a chance to win every night they play.
Yeah, and you brought up Markstrom, you brought up Dylan again. I think we have to bring up, Seamus Casey in this preseason. I
Yeah.
think, with all the injuries on the blue line, I think he's made his case to make this opening night roster. And, me personally, I would still probably, send him down to Utica and let him, get minutes down there. But I mean, if anything, he's shown that he's able to play at the NHL level, and now he's got everybody calling for him to make this team, and good for him. He's blown my expectations out of the water. I didn't think he'd be this we all know like his game, and we've seen it at Michigan and his confidence on the puck on the blue line, but to do it it's one thing to do it in Michigan. It's another thing to bring it to the NHL level, and it's only preseason, but he's showing everybody that he is a future NHL player, and he might be closer than I would have thought that he would have been. What are your thoughts on him?
I absolutely agree. I think that I'm going to give you two player comparisons that the Devils could approach Seamus Casey with, and I think one is far more successful than the other. If you look at how the Devils treated Simon Nemec last year, started the season in the AHL, was probably their best defenseman all year long. Some injuries happened to Dougie Hamilton, especially in New Jersey. Simon Nemec gets called up, and it becomes very apparent this guy's never going to play another AHL game ever again. and that is the case. I think that, look, with the injuries happening to the Devils right now, I mean, you hope that it's nothing serious. Nemec is back. Hughes is, a month and a half away from being back. Hataka maybe is going to be a little bit more long-term, but he doesn't really have a spot yet in New Jersey anyway. Pesce back on the ice. You think that there's not going to be room for Casey, and that's okay. Start him in the AHL. Let him build up his confidence playing against pros for the first time in his career. He'll when the spot gets opened on the blue line, I mean, it's hockey. At least for a bit, he's going to have a chance to come play in the NHL level. And I think he's going to wow people the way that Nemec did last year. And we're going to say this guy may never play back in the AHL ever again. That's a great thing. Absolutely a great thing. It's a good problem to have, right? Yeah. Or they could approach this the way that the Devils did with Ty Smith a few years ago. And I vividly remember some of my friends back in high school going to, I believe it was Devils Islanders in the preseason, 2019, I want to say. And we were saying this is what we want this team to look like going forward. If our best bet is we need Ty Smith to come out and be a really solid rookie defenseman. And I remember my one buddy Eric, and I know that's like a meme, say my buddy Eric. My actual friend Eric was so high on Ty Smith. He's like OHL defensive scoring record. Like this guy's legit. Was it the OHL or WHL? WHL, that's right. And he was awful. Like, and I mean no disrespect to Ty Smith because he did have some good moments in New Jersey and is an NHLer, and I'm never going to touch that. I could never disagree with his skill because he clearly had so much raw skill, but he just looked so behind the pace of play, and that was preseason hockey. And I think it never really materialized with Ty Smith at the NHL level, except for a few moments here and there. So while I was really excited to have him be involved with the NHL, I remember walking away from that game and saying they played pretty well. Ty Smith was disappointing, and I don't think he should be in the NHL immediately. And I think they kind of forced it with him. And I think his career has paid the price, unfortunately. So if Seamus Casey can be a bit of a cautionary tale, he's coming in with as much, if not more, hype than Ty Smith. Yeah. So if they can really treat his situation properly, I think he can be a great guy long term. But what I think if I'm remembering what you said correctly, I agree. Start him out in the AHL, let him work on his game, get that confidence, and once the chance comes, because it's more than likely gonna come, I think he'll crush it.
Yeah, I think, if there's ever a team to like take a kid slowly, it's the Devils. They've shown it already, like you said with Nemec. I mean, they brought in so much depth this offseason at the defensive, at the blue line. I mean, you have DeSimone, who's an NHL quality defenseman. Like
Yeah,
he's a depth guy, but he's NHL quality.
I would put
Um,
Kovacevic in that.
Kovacevic as well.
Yeah.
He's shown that he's had a decent preseason as well, and he
Hmm.
was probably going to be a seventh D to start the year if everybody was healthy. But now with all these injuries, he's going to step in. Um, I just feel like don't rush the guy. Like maybe he is ready, but I think the Devils are in a spot where they can overcook a player like they did with Nemec again. Like,
Right.
look what it's done so far with Nemec. Now he's an NHL player. He's one of the best defensive prospects in the
No doubt.
game. So I feel like if you take time, let him develop his defensive side more, let him get a bit more physical, let him be in the gym a bit more in Utica and let him learn the pro game. I think that's another thing we kind of overlook is, some of these guys, they're good enough. They have the raw skill, but they don't know the pro game as well as, they might think. So yes, he's having, success in the preseason, but again, it's the preseason. So
Yeah.
we'll see how this goes. He won't be playing tonight, which is interesting. I think, you'd probably want to just put him in there just to keep getting him more minutes, but maybe that shows that he won't be on that flight to check in, and the coaching staff agrees with us. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the space is there for him now, and I think he's earned it. But overcooking the player, I love that terminology. I think is probably for the best here, and I say that knowing that Nemec last year quarterbacked the power play. Luke Hughes was the other unit's quarterback, and now Dougie Hamilton comes back, and now potentially Seamus Casey comes back. You've got four defensemen who can really run your blue line. And look, Brendan Dillon's got a cannon.
Yeah.
So like you might want to have him. Like I was all year I was begging Lindy Ruff, put Colin Miller on a power play.
Oh
Get
man.
set him up for one time or set up Brendan Dillon for one time. You've got five realistically defensemen that you could put. I'm not assuming that they will put Brendan Dillon on a power play,
Yeah.
but you've got
In a
five guys
pinch.
really,
In a
yeah,
pinch, you could put
that
him
could
on
hold
there.
the blue line for you. And this is off topic because we didn't write this down as part of the show. But now I want to ask you: do the Devils start running two defensemen on their power play units? Because this has long been a something that is argued. You really only need one guy to hold the blue line when you're playing 5-on-4. You definitely only need one guy when you're playing 5-on-3. But the Devils, I think some of their best attributes are held by their defensemen. And I don't know if you're killing a penalty, do you play 3 or 4 defensemen on a penalty kill? I think it's good to have two guys who are used to being at the top of the zone on a power play. I normally I'm okay with just having one defenseman, but if I'm looking at the roster now, two power play units with Hughes and Hamilton, and then they swap for Nemec and potentially Casey. I love that. I love the sound of that. Maybe just one has two defensemen.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point because with Jack on the point for the first power play unit, it brings up an interesting point. Like, where do you put Timo Meyer? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll have him in the front of the net, and then sometimes they'll have him on his off wing. But then where do you put Jesper Beck? Because he's also on the off wing. So
Then
it
where do you
kind
put
of
Nico? You put him in the slot or you put him in front of the
exactly.
net?
So it's kind of like you bring up a real good, interesting point. Maybe for that first unit, you run like a Dougie Hamilton and a Luke Hughes because Luke could be on that off wing on the across from Jack and Dougie's at the point, like at the top because of
Yeah.
the shot. And you could see a pass go from Jack to Luke to Dougie and then a
Mm-hmm.
one timer. And then you have Brad and Heischer on the rest of the unit. So you bring up an interesting point. They'll probably stick with the one defenseman,
Yeah.
but maybe if they're like cold or something, like because like like if you look at Dougie Hamilton and Luke Hughes, those are probably two of the best offensive players we have on this team. So
Right.
if they're trying to load up a power play unit, why not?
Hmm.
I probably would agree with you for that first unit, and then you get Timo Meyer on his off wing for the second unit for his one timer,
Yeah.
and then you could put like you know, you could put Nason in front of the net.
Nason in
So
front of that, Mercer on the opposite side, or Palat on the opposite side.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it
think there's
it's
a lot that they could
interesting.
explore. I
Yeah.
think they'll probably want, because I think the first power play unit they probably don't want to change it because it just that puts the five best players on the ice all at once, in my opinion. If you have Jack and Dougie holding the point back to back, Bratt, Hischier, Meyer. While I do appreciate the attention to getting Meyer in his best position, they'll probably just keep that the way it is. And then I think for the second unit, that way, then you could have Nemec and Hughes together, Palat on one side, Mercer on the other, Nason slot in front of the net. I think that's, or maybe you find a place for Tatar instead of Palat. I think there's a lot of opportunities for these guys to explore with their special teams. And for most of last year, or at least for the start of last season, the special teams were this team's saving grace. They were awful at 5-on-5
Oh
and
yeah.
really
When
good on the
Jack was
power play.
healthy, yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I feel like I'm watching the Rangers right now, man. What's going on? We're supposed to be good at even
The
strength.
Oilers.
Right. And then we had some injuries and then everything was
Yeah.
bad.
They're
So
tanked.
so I mean, I think special teams are always important, but I think with a team like this that has such a talented crop of players at the top end, they have to be good on special teams. And I think that, the flexibility here is something to be excited about. So we've talked about special teams. Let's just talk about the real team. Let's talk about these forward lines and this
Yeah,
defense. What
I actually
what
wanted
18 guys?
I wanted to talk to you about the first line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read it off for you guys because I have it listed right here. So first line is Timo Meyer on the left wing, Jack Hughes down the middle, Jesper Bratt. Second line you go Tatar, Nico Hischier, Dawson Mercer. Third line you go Palat, Hala, Nason. Fourth line you go Cotta, Lazar, Bastion. Okay, that's a solid lineup, but my problem probably comes with the top six, right? Um, yes, it's preseason, but I feel like we've seen Hughes, Bratt, and Meyer together for an extended period of time last year, and I just don't know what it is. I don't think Meyer works with Hughes for whatever reason. I don't know if they're clashing for whatever reason. Their styles shouldn't clash. One's a power forward and one's a playmaker, but it just seems like they don't mix. And then on the other hand, when you play Meyer with Nico Hischier, that's when his game kind of comes to fruition. That's when he plays
Right.
his best hockey. Um, so I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on those first two lines because I'd probably have Nico Hischier with Timo Meyer.
So my thought when I see Meyer, Hughes, Brad as the first line, I agree with you. I think you don't get the best out of Timo this way. But I'm looking at this line and I'm seeing the Sheldon Keefe fingerprints of the Toronto Maple Leafs all over it. Like,
Mm.
am I looking at Nylander, Matthews, Marner right here? Because I mean, like each of those guys' player comp is pretty fair, I think, in terms of Hughes and Matthews kind of fill out the same role on this
Superstar,
team.
the superstar.
Brat and Marner,
Yep.
two-way forwards who are high scoring, who play at speed. Like I think there's some similarities between those guys. And then Meyer Nylander, it kind of gets lost a little bit, but I feel like William Nylander is a guy who always did better on his own line. And I think Timo Meyer is a guy who's always done better next to his countrymate Nico Hischier. Um, I think you get the part of the problem is you got three guys there who love to fly to the net. I know Meyer's the power forward, so that's really more of his nature. But Hughes is the guy who gets it, flies through the neutral zone, and tries to get as close to the net as possible to score. He has a great shot, but he's not a shooter. That's not really his game. And I would qualify that for Brad as well. Brad's more of a playmaker than Timo Meyer is, of course, but I think he has a lot of the same qualities as Hughes, which is why those two guys are magic together.
Yeah.
So I think that first line, for me, it's fine. I think having a guy like Andre Palat work with them, I know he's not a first liner. When those three played together, at times, they had the puck on a string, right? Like those three guys all play a very similar style of Palat, not so much with the skating at this point in his career, but passing first, playmaking. Those are three guys with very similar profiles, and they can all do a job. So I like Palat as an option to play with those guys. Probably not long term, but I think can do a job there, especially against teams that they know they're going to skate against. That's why I also think that Dawson Mercer is a guy that could play with that first line, because he's going to provide the power forward status that Timo Meier does, but he's not going to fly into the net as hard. He's going to be a guy that you can rely on for a little bit more of the tic-tac-toe of it all. And I think that puts Meier back to the second line with Nico in a place where he's going to be more comfortable. Or if you want to look at it this way, you move Nico and Dawson Mercer, or Nico, excuse me, up, you bring Hughes and Bratt down, and then you start the games with Nico Hischier's face-off ability and Timo Meier's physicality, and then one line change, and you've got Hughes, Bratt, Mercer, or Hughes, Bratt, Palat, Hughes, Bratt, Tatar.
Yeah,
I think that's really, really where Sheldon Keefe. That's the one gripe I have with this team right now. I feel like I'm looking at this, and this is what it would be. These are what the lines would be if you plug this squad into NHL 25 and it was just done by ratings, right? Which is fine. The best players are on the first line. The second best group of players are on the second line. But I do think the profile of Hischier being the more responsible centerman of the two should be on the first line. I think playing next to Timo Meier is good, but then I wouldn't want to split up Hughes and Bratt. So I like a first line of Meier, Hischier, Tatar, and a second line of Hughes, Bratt, Mercer.
Yeah, I think, we'll see how these lines eventually play in real games. But that's just basically my thought on, past experiences with these players. And, maybe a different system with Sheldon Keefe kind of opens up Timo Meier with Jack Hughes that we haven't seen before. But
yeah, and it could.
We'll see. But going down to the bottom six, I think that's where we really see the big difference this year in our bottom six is when you add like a Stefan Noesen and a Paul Cotter to this team. And you move Lazar into the middle. He was playing on the right side last year. And now he's playing in the middle where he kind of wants to be, I think. I feel like he wants to be a center. And that kind of opens his game up to be, I guess, more defensively sound. So, what are your thoughts on that bottom six?
I love Paul Cotter and I love Stefan Noesen and I love what Paul Cotter's been treating this in the media. He's like, he hasn't used the P word, but he's like, this team's not going to be a bunch of Nancy's. You know what I'm saying? He has really made a point of saying, like, we're not going to be afraid of other teams when we go out there. And for long stretches of last season, it unfortunately did feel like that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there have been times where I feel like, especially under Lindy Ruff, the Devils would overcorrect that status and try to play too physical, and then they would lose their identity, and then they would just lose the physical battle, and they wouldn't have any presence in the neutral zone, this, that, the other, and they would lose games that way. So I think having a clear identity in your bottom six versus your top six is important. I think Paul Cotter is a guy who brings that. I think Stefan Noesen's a guy who grinds every millisecond of every shift he's out there. I was so upset when the Devils lost him 4 or 5 years ago, and I think he's a great pickup to have back in New Jersey. And as for Curtis Lazar, he was excellent last year. I love Curtis Lazar.
Such a surprise.
Yeah,
it was great to see.
And I think he's exactly the type of player that other guys who are bottom sixers want to play around. Guys that if you get him in front of the net, you'll probably take the chance and score. He might even put in a sneaky good pass to get someone else in front of the net. But defensively, he's a rock. He's digging out in the corners. This is not a team that's going to get bullied. I have no reason to believe that this team will get bullied. This team did get bullied last year. And at times when the team was successful in 2022-23, they were bullied. Paul Cotter, Curtis Lazar, and Nathan Bastian, that is a fourth line I don't want to go up against. No. That's a fourth line that's going to win games for the New Jersey Devils. And as for the third line, Paula, Palat, and Noesen, not only is that pretty hard-nosed, maybe with the exception of Palat. I mean, he's scrappy. He's not exactly a physical, but he is scrappy. That's also an incredibly talented third line. These are guys who all have played and won in different places. So I love the makeup of this team on the bottom six. I think Tom Fitzgerald very clearly recognized the problems with the team and addressed them. For me, that's a home run. And I love the scope of this team, the balance, like you said earlier in the show. I think that this team is more balanced than it's been. Even more so than 2022-23. So that's a great thing going into the season. And yeah, we'll learn more about it once they get over to Czechia and start those back-to-back against the Sabres. I think that pretty much catches up on everything that's happening stateside.
Mm.
Let's, unless you want to jump and talk about the D-men as well.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to list
Mm-hmm.
the pairs that they've been going with. Obviously, a lot of
Sure.
injuries on the blue line. So they have Brendan Dillon with Dougie Hamilton. That's your first pair. Siegenthaler with Kovacevic. And this is what uh, we'll see tonight against the Islanders. And then how do you say the guy that's on the PTO? Zabrali?
Zaboral.
Zaboral. Zaboral is going to be playing with Nemec on that third pair. And then you have DeSimone and Casey as the extras. Pesce working by himself. And then Jake Allen is going to get the full game as well tonight. So obviously it's a bit of a mixed match than we would have thought coming into the season, especially with now they're dealing with multiple injuries on that blue line. But anybody standing out to you these preseason games?
I mean, we talked about Brendan Dillon, so I don't have to continue with him. I will talk about Dougie Hamilton though, because having him
Thank
back,
God he's back.
right? Like having him back, even if he's not on the score sheet, when he's on the ice, there's four forwards out there,
Yeah.
and that sounds like a bad thing. Like, oh, defensively, he's a problem. I mean, we know that. Like, he's not back there to win battles and keep the other team off the score sheet necessarily. He does a bit of that. Sometimes he's a physical guy, big presence for sure.
Yeah.
But if you ask me, just having him out there brings another element of surprise on the attack that other defensemen, Luke Hughes included, Seaman Nemec included, they just don't offer. So having Dougie Hamilton out there, it's another weapon, and it just opens up more things on the ice for the other guys. And I think he hasn't looked bad either. I think he's looked healthy. I think he's skated well. And look, I don't know if I want him playing with Brendan Dillon long term. I think eventually, once everyone's healthy, we'll see him playing next to Siegenthaler, and that'll be the top pairing. And Siegenthaler struggled a bit last season, but I think once he has his partner long term to play against, to play with, for most of the season this year, I have no reason to suspect, or no reason not to suspect that he won't just step back into his role and be a reliable shut down defensive defenseman again. So having Dougie back, it's beyond what he provides himself.
Yeah.
He opens up space for other players, and it's just a home run that he's back there as well. And I think that eventually it's going to bring out the best out of Siegenthaler, which is something that the Devils sorely missed last season.
Yeah, I think, you kind of said it there. I think, getting Siegenthaler back with Hamilton, I think, will probably, hopefully, bring back the Siegenthaler that we all saw in 22, 23. And we all thought this was a steal of the defenseman to get on the contract that he is. Obviously, he takes a downhill turn last year, but, why should we expect anything different with when he gets Hamilton back that he won't, get
Right.
positive regression? So we'll see with that. Brendan Dillon, I think will bring a presence to him on the blue line that the Devils didn't have last year, and that's a physical presence. We did have a Kevin Ball with his height and weight, but he's not a Brendan Dillon. Brendan Dillon's one of the he throws the most hits in the NHL. Him and Paul Cotter are up there in the NHL for most hits thrown last year. So I think bringing a guy like that with his presence on the blue line, like he'll hit anything that's moving, and I think that's something that the Devils have missed, despite having bigger defensemen in the past. So I can't wait to see him in action. I can't wait to see him against the Rangers because, oh man, I can't wait to play the Rangers this year, man. I'm so excited. I think this team could be really good. I think it's way more balanced on D than it's been in the past as well. Like everybody knows their role on the defense on the defense this year. Like Brendan Dillon knows that he's not here to be one of the best offensive players on the back end. He knows he's here to bring stability to his team, throw hits. Pesce as well, brings this stability to this team. I think this could be a really good team in front of Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen this year.
Yeah, and just one quick question before we talk about some things that are going on in Europe for some Devils prospects. You mentioned Devils Rangers. Matt Rempe and Edstrom are fighting out for that final right wing spot on their fourth line there. I have to imagine that he'll be in the roster when they play the Devils. Do you roster Curtis McDermott against the Rangers?
Yeah, first game, put him in.
You
Of
got it, right?
course, put him in. I don't know who you bench because I'd love Bastion in there too. I think Bastion wants some revenge too, man. He
Right?
put him out for a while. This is I'm telling you that first game is gonna be real exciting to watch,
That'd be fun.
especially if Rempe's in there. I think this team could have a bunch of different guys go Matt Rempe if they need to this year. So they don't necessarily need to have McDermott in there, but when I wanted to bring McDermott up, but we kind of went past the forwards. Most people don't like that he's on the team, but I feel like as an extra, he is
He's
he's a needed quantity for what he brings. Like when he's
he's
on,
not
yeah, you
he he's not taking a roster spot from anybody.
no,
And look, if something does happen, let's say this team's on a road trip and there's an injury and the guy needs to be swapped out in and out, McDermott is the perfect guy to have on there. You throw him in the fourth line, or if it's a D-man, you throw him on the third pairing. I'm not saying you want him to play defense in this season, but he's a guy who can play both. He's the perfect type of guy to keep around as an extra. And yeah, he's going to be valuable in these games like against the Rangers, man.
yeah, he brings like confidence to the forwards. Like if anything happens, he's got your back. I think a lot more guys will bring that this year, like a Brendan Dillon and a Paul Cotter, a Stefan Nason. I think they will all bring that to the top six forwards this year. Like they can, they'll be able to do a bit more than what they would have in years past because they would have been taken advantage of. But I think having a guy like McDermott on the bench, I think it just opens people's eyes. Like I gotta watch out for myself. I can't take liberties against the Devils now.
Right.
But obviously, again, he won't be playing much this year, and that's the whole point I wanted to bring up. Like he won't be on the even when he's on the bench, he'll play like 5 minutes, and we'll get his worth of we'll get what he's worth this year. So if you wanted to move on to the Euro guys, we could do that if you wanted.
Yeah, let's move on because we do got to start wrapping up here. We've got really four names to talk about, and perhaps more guys who have started off the season in Europe. I mean, Lenni Hameenaho can't go a game without recording a point, it seems. Arseni Gritsyuk has been long. I mean, outside of Hameenaho, it's those two guys dominate the Devils' European prospect discourse. Anton Silayev is a guy you also mentioned who admittedly, again, I have not been able to see much of. I all my whole feed is Gritsyuk and Hameenaho, more Hameenaho than Gritsyuk now, which is crazy. So where do you want to start?
Let's start with Lenny, man, because again, like second round pick in 23, not much is heard of him. I think a lot of people didn't feel like his scoring ability would be there. Maybe he'll take a downtick when he comes over to North America. But I think he's shown last year to start the year and now this year again to start the year. I mean, he's got 9 points in his first 6 games. I mean, what we have here? He's got 4 goals and 5 assists in his first 6 games. He had
He's a
two.
stud.
He had 2 assists this year. He's going to be a perfect middle six player on the right wing. Um, I just can't wait till he comes over next year because again, him and Arseni Gritsyuk are going to come over next year. They are going to sign ELCs and play in North America this next year and in the NHL. I think Hameenaho could go straight in the NHL even as a 20-year-old because he's not even 20 yet. He turns 20 in November. And I think you kind of need those type of guys that on your cap that are going to be making less than $1 million. So Lenny, he's hot. He's on fire right now. So he had another 2 assists today, getting him up to those 9 points. And then Gritsyuk is again, we'll bring him up. He scored a goal today in SKA's 8-5 win. He's playing on that first line. So let's say that both Gritsyuk and Hameenaho are playing on their team's first line. So that's big for them. Gritsyuk's up to 7 points in 8 games. He missed, I believe, 2 games or 1 or 2 games with a small injury, but he's fully back. And then Salayev, I mean, he's also playing first line minutes for his team over there on first pair of minutes as an 18-year-old. I think we can't stress that enough, guys. He's an 18-year-old. He'll be an 18-year-old from, I believe, the whole season. So he's got 4 assists in 10 games. He's averaging about, I believe it was like 17 and a half minutes. Maybe it might be more than that. I tweeted it out. I forget. I was trying to do the math. It's kind of hard with the KHL. Sometimes they'll post all the minutes, sometimes they won't. So I believe he's averaging maybe in between 17 and a half and 18 minutes on the blue line. And, that those are the three main guys I would say that we'll be watching in Europe this year. But I also wanted to bring up Herman Traff. I believe that was our third round pick from this year.
Mm-hmm.
He's on loan from his first division team in Sweden, HV71, and he's on loan to the second division in hockey. I was banking, I believe. He's at Nybro. He scored a goal and scored a goal on the power play. So he's got 1 goal in 2 games. So those are the main forward guys we'll probably be seeing this year. And then in goal, I mean, Devils just keep finding goalies. We've always struggled with goalies in the past. So to have a bunch of goalies now in the mid-round picks, I mean, Jakub Malek off to a tremendous start. He's 3-0 over in Finland right now.
I think just to interject for a moment, the Devils have done a good job getting young goalies as of late. I think, look, going back as far as Mackenzie Blackwood, if not for injuries, I think he would have been a tremendous goalie at the NHL level.
Yep.
I think Akira Schmid is still very likely to be a NHL maybe backup or a 1A 1B type of goaltender, and I think Nico Dawes is still has a great future ahead of him in the NHL. I think Isaac Poulter as well. And now Jakub Malek is a guy that we didn't expect to hit the ground running this fast. And look at him now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I remember saying that he was going to go back on loan to Ilves over in Finland this year. I think that's how you pronounce it. And someone commented, he was like, "Yeah, but he won't be a starter." You look at, I believe they lost whoever was like the real starter the past couple of years. I believe he moved on. And they brought in another Czech guy. You look at the two numbers between the goalies. I mean, it's night and day. Jakub Malek's 3-0. He's got a 133 goals against and a 946 save percentage with a shutout. And the other guys
good.
And the other goalies in the 800s for save percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're gonna rely heavily on Malek this year. And again, I brought it up on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I think, once Jake Allen moves on this year, because, again, you're going to have to free up money places and Jake Allen still makes, a pretty penny. So if you can get a guy on an entry level deal like a Nico Dawes, he's not an entry level anymore, but he's still making, relatively less than Jake Allen. I think, Jakub Malek could come in and steal the backup role next year if he keeps playing how he's playing. I mean, it's going to be him or Nico Dawes probably battling for that spot next year. And I think, Malek with his size as well could easily take that backup job. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on him. But, another goalie over in Europe, or not another goalie over in Europe, but another European player that could be on this NHL roster next year.
Yeah, and just before we wrap up, the roster is shaping up nicely for these guys to come over without much difficulty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Andre Palat's not going to be a Devil next season. Maybe not by the end of this season.
Most likely.
Most likely. Tomas Tatar and Stefan Nason, I don't know how long term, and Eric Halla even, I don't know how long term any of those guys are. These are all Bastian as well, right? These are all spots that are up for grabs for these younger, and let's face it, in most cases, more talented European guys who are playing in big roles for their teams at young ages to just step right in and challenge things at the NHL level, which, going back a couple of years, or not a couple of years, but really a year and a half, it's not so bad that they went and traded away Fabian Zetterlund, Shakir Mukhamadullin, and now Alexander Holtz, and Akira Schmid. These are all guys that I would have loved to have kept in New Jersey, but I mean, their prospect pool is good enough to suggest that these guys were tradable. And
And you
I
bring
think
up
that,
some of those names. I think Mukamadulin and Zetterlund, like you bring up those names. I mean, like it just shows that the Devils scouting department has been working these past couple of years,
yeah,
and now they're being able to bring some of these guys into the NHL fold now. And obviously, it's the success and trading away certain prospects has hurt overall the prospect pool of the Devils. But I think if you're able to get three guys into the NHL roster next year, I think that is, that's what they want from the scouting department is get NHL players here as soon as possible.
yeah, and I think honestly, on paper, the Devils roster a year from now looks stronger than it does this year. So that's a lot to be excited about. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Devils play tonight in the preseason against the Islanders, their final preseason game with the NHL squad. They've got three more later in the week, but the main guys are getting on a plane to go to Czechia soon for that pair of games against the Sabres to start their season off on October 4th and 5th. So a lot of exciting hockey to look forward to. That's the end of our show for this week. Didn't expect it to go this long, but we covered a lot of important stuff here. I think we hit
Yeah.
almost an hour once again, and we're loving every minute of it. So we'll see you guys again next week. For Daniel Rebane, I've been James Burley. This has been Puck on the Parkway. So thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.